From AIA, Troy Barnes. First, some supporters to thank, and thank you for listening. Here it is, the fully integrated cloud CX platform that you need to act smarter, respond faster, and be first in CX. Now you can turn innovation into value, scale up when you need, and add new capabilities whenever the situation demands it. One experience, a single unified solution for employees and customers. One cloud, a single cloud offering based on AWS public cloud technology. One path for migration to the CX1 platform. The fully integrated cloud customer experience platform from NICE, allowing you to be first in CX. Visit nice.com for more. Leaders responsible for operations, information technology, customer experience, contact centers, customer care, service and support are invited to register for a free CCW digital membership. Membership includes networking with 100,000 plus qualified industry professionals, quarterly executive research reports, product matchmaking, and more. Go to ccwdigital.com to join the community. That's ccwdigital.com. The Chief Customer Experience Officer for AIA Malaysia, Troy Barnes, joins us and shares that he tries to keep it as simple as possible. He sees his position as ultimately him being personally accountable for the experiences the organization creates for customers. He, of course, credits his very talented team for actually getting the job done. The biggest thing that management tries to endorse is that when they talk customer, they practice customer, meaning that rather than simply talking about the customer experience, he and the team actively get out into the world and experience what the customer experiences so that they can improve on that very thing. Welcome to CCW Digital on B2B IQ. I'm your host, Seth Adler. Download episodes on ccwdigital.com or through our app in iTunes, within the iTunes podcast app and Google Play, or wherever you currently get your podcasts. Troy Barnes.
I try and keep it as simple as I can, and that means ultimately I'm accountable for the experiences we create for customers.
Okay.
And of course, beneath all of that, I've got an extremely talented team that help deliver those experiences.
I love the it's Teddy Roosevelt for me. The buck stops here. You know, You've heard that phrase.
Yep.
And so you would ascribe to this philosophy, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
So as far as management is concerned, you know, what school, what philosophy are you coming from beyond that simple phrase, the buck stops with me?
I think probably the biggest thing we try and endorse in what we do is making sure when we talk customer, we practice customer.
What does that mean?
When we talk about customers, we think about customers. It includes being with customers, doing it for customers, and actually interacting with real customers. So, you know, I leverage one of the phrases a guy by the name of Steve Blank has coined, which is get out of the building. You're not going to get insight and observation about what customers are really thinking and what problems they're really trying to solve unless you're out there with them.
Yeah.
And I think that goes a long way to practicing what you preach, if nothing else.
Management by walking around all the way down to the customer.
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What I would imagine, if you're telling folks to do that, they are doing it, at least some of them, right? And you've got some folks that won't do whatever you say whenever you say it. But when you tell folks to do that, and then they do that, what kind of stories do they come back with? What are some of the more interesting anecdotes that you've heard?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our business model, like many insurers in this part of the world, is led largely by an intermediary, such as an insurance agent. So the traditional concept of we don't deal with customers, the agent does, gets contradicted when you sit down and actually talk to a customer. And I've had conversations where people have said to me, hey, listen, I'd love to connect with you guys, you know, but my guy does it for me. I don't really need to. He just does it. And when you have those conversations, you open the door to all the things we can do that we don't or we haven't traditionally. It's dare I say it, it's just another one of those aha moments. We can talk to customers. We actually can engage them. Because in this part of the world, there's a mindset, I'm sure, in most insurance companies that the customer is the agent's responsibility. We keep our arm's length. That's not the play anymore. And whilst we don't compromise their value proposition to their customers, we certainly do our very best to augment that and make sure we play a key role.
Augmenting that relationship would include such things as what?
So I guess what you could determine low value type things that don't require an agent to physically go and see the customer. And I'll just use a very basic example.
Sure.
I've moved house. I need to update my address. I don't need an agent to come over and build a relationship, try and cross-sell or upsell a new product because I changed my address. Quick call to these guys, or I walk into one of their stores, or I use the portal that I've got, and I just do it because it's easy, it's simple, and I can. We've provided those channels for those reasons. And don't get me wrong, there are others we'd like to use more, which currently the agent still sees as their value play. We'll support the ones that want us to do so for now and let the agents run with it where we do and just complement them as best we can. But the tide is shifting because 5-10 years ago or more, particularly in this part of the world, it was they did the lot. And in some markets, particularly the emerging ones, they still do. So we're, in a positive way, balancing that relationship to make sure that we can allow them to focus on making sure they grow their business. So acquiring more customers, getting more customers adequately insured. We play the role of let's make sure the relationship beyond that is at the level that you expect it to for your customer that you bring in.
So we've talked about you managing your team and then all the way kind of through the value chain to the ultimate customer. What about kind of back up? You know, when you are managing the customer experience back up to the CEO, CFO, what's important for you to share with them? What are they understanding? What are they, needing kind of, reminders on?
Yeah, good question. I think it's not an easy play. I started the journey in my current role with my former boss, repositioning the role that I took over.
Okay.
And we were very deliberate about branding my role as Chief Customer Experience Officer.
As opposed to what, I wonder?
As opposed to Chief Operating Officer.
Interesting.
So my predecessor was the COO for the company.
Interesting.
And it wasn't about title, but more about the message that it was sending to the team that I have, the rest of my peers in the business, and also our intermediaries. So the role was about, this is the focus, this is what we're here to do.
Yeah.
We started that journey with, collaborative vision across the whole company and then set sail from there.
Yeah.
When it comes to dealing with my peers and my, managing upwards, so to speak, it's a few things. Keep the message simple and short.
Yeah.
I go all the way back to Sam Walton, who quotes the whole, without a customer, you don't have a business.
Right.
And he or she can fire everyone from the chairman down and by spending somewhere else.
Sure.
And we use that repetitively because what I find is we've got a very, very complex business. There are lots of things happening in lots of places and lots of change happening. So if you're not continually plugging the message, the core of why we're here, it gets lost. And insurance companies traditionally have been very product and distribution channel centric. So I know that we've got to keep that agenda at the front.
Yeah.
Because if it's not, it'll lose and it'll start to become part of the underlying lost in wherever it is.
Sure. Yeah. No, old habits die hard.
Yes.
This is what it is. Angela from Prudential, when I spoke with her, she's she's the Chief Customer Officer, so obviously very similar in terms of terminology, but she was the CMO. I wonder, it's an interesting thing that you're not necessarily a marketing guy, right?
Correct. It's I'm going to step out of school here. I think marketing has a role to play.
Okay.
And I know that there are very differing views around marketing, operations, product, branding, even strategy. And there's some companies that have chief strategy officers. We don't. For me, if you're going to have that customer title, you've got to be neck deep in it. You've got to be part of it. And, I might be a bit sort of narrow in my view, but you've got to deliver it. And I think for those execs that want to play the role, they need to make sure their role has them accountable for giving and delivering those things that are valuable to the customer. So for me, it's a very easy transition because the chief operating officers for insurance companies largely cover things like your voice channel, your retail walk-in branches, your customer portals, and then you're also a partner to your intermediaries. That's where experiences happen. Now, I know for Angela, for example, it's a subtle difference with chief customer and chief customer experience.
Sure.
I think at the end of the day, look, it comes down to the positioning of the role, being very clear what it's accountable for, and then delivering it.
No matter what your background is, and once we say here's what it is, let's go
Correct.
do that.
And I think regardless whether it's marketing, operations, or somewhere else, the thing I find where the rubber hits the road is the team that you have that are there in the coalface of serving customers. They can sell a sales pitch. They can see a sales pitch from a mile off.
Sure.
So if you're practicing and you're preaching the good word, and you're not out there, they'll take your good word with a grain of salt.
Right.
And that's why I say, coming back to your point, wherever you are, you need to be neck deep in there. So I'm in a call center or a branch every month, just to make sure that I've got continuity and that I'm with the team and they know that I'm out there. It doesn't matter which level you are in the organisation.
Sure. Yeah. So you yourself are in there. What is a recent example of a lesson learned for you in the call center, I wonder?
Yeah, great one. So I was there a couple of weeks ago and I was listening to some calls. We have a sort of a number of verticals, if you will, based on skills. One of the skill sets is claims. So we were listening to some of the claims calls coming in, and it was astounding the simplicity of the information that was being asked that we provide through other channels. And, this call went on for 10 minutes. And it wasn't one, it was 3 or 4. So the takeaway was, why are they calling? We have an innovation team that works for me, and we're trying to solve that problem at this point.
Yeah.
And the other learning I took out of it was, fact-finding about how we authenticate someone. It's a 45-second to a minute 10, depending on the process they go through. That's 30% of a typical call, an average handle time for a call that's gone. That we must get that quicker.
Yeah.
Because our call volumes are huge relative to a lot of other players in the market.
Let's dive into that innovation team,
Yep.
right? And let's take this same example. I would imagine chatbots would be at least on the list, if not at the top of the list, as potentially a solution, right?
Yes, and that's exactly the approach we avoid, because I think I spent a lot of time over in Silicon Valley learning and trying to articulate and pick the brains of the guys who have been there, done that, got the scars to prove it.
Yeah.
Bring that back into kicking off what we started at the very end of last year, a program that was starting in the CX space, customer experience space.
Sure.
But the strategy was we wanted this to be a corporate capability at some point where we could scale. So, we're 7 or 8 months in, and we're going about, again, augmenting the other work we're doing through our normal day-to-day operations and servicing. We have a transformation team that do a lot of cleanup work, simplification, and then we have the innovation team who go about solving real customer problems in a very different way, so that we can iterate, experiment in days, not months, and come out with what we call these minimum viable products that put value on the table to solve that problem quickly.
Why would a chatbot not be that?
Well, it could be.
Sure.
But the mindset is, am I solving the problem, and are my observations in interactions and discussions with customers, real customers, validating that that's the problem to be solved?
How do you mean?
So I'll give you an example. So you come back to the call thing, right? So one of the problems we threw out on the table was we're getting too many calls. So that's an inside-out view.
Okay.
So let's turn that around and find out, is that a problem for the customer? So we had conversations. Do you really love the call center that much you want to call them for these things?
Is this fun for you?
Yeah. And the answer is no.
Right.
Okay. Let's look more into that. Why? How is that happening? When is that happening? Why are you doing that? What are you trying to get out of it? And those are just a set of ongoing individual discussions. It's not focus groups or surveys. These are just individual interaction points. And we collect all this data, and we have a lot of assumptions that we make that we think is the problem that's coming through these conversations.
Sure.
But we go back out and experiment and validate those. And that's the sort of daily cycle. So this is where in a week or two, we get to a point where we say, this is absolutely the problem needs to solve. Let's go about solving it.
Sure.
We found out something else that's a problem.
Yeah.
So let's go on solving that now. Let's redirect to what we call pivot.
I see.
Or we're still not sure whether this actually is the problem, so we need to experiment further.
So the chatbot's a shortcut that we don't want to take.
Correct, because it's like the panacea of the silver bullet. You know, we want to make sure that when we get to the problem, we find the best solution, maximum value for that customer or customer group, and equally importantly, they use it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where we'll bring in a small group of early adopters who play with this model. We prototype, we pilot, and then we get to a point where we know that we can scale it. You know, and we've got a couple of these that we're working in the back end of now, which have been from start to ready to scale. 7 to 8 week piece of work, and that includes all of the interviews, experiments, the loops that we go through, and it's creating the innovation capabilities. It's not innovation. It's not about the chatbot, the AI, or the blockchain. It's how you solve customer problems with a new approach, looking for new value.
Yeah, the technology's not the answer.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct. And it's been brilliant. I mean, it's been very, very well received.
What do you see as a next tentpole of learning, or of execution, or of adoption of what? You know, where are you headed right now? What's the next step?
The next immediate step for us is scaling what we've built as a base. So we've gone through a broad array of digital platforms to enable several channels, and we need to iterate and accelerate the momentum on that quickly without having to create, 9, 12, 15-month programs of work, and again, solve the problem. So using digital to add value, not build an entire digital capability that doesn't get used. It ends up being an expense on top of the papers and everything else that you keep. At that point, for me, what we need to do is make practical and strategic choices about enabling the customers, and also making sure we're not going to be all things to all people all the time. So one of the things, I was just having a conversation before, is that as you build up that digital capability and the flexibility of those channels, you need to make a decision about those papers. And one of the things we're moving to is we're dropping off. So papers will no longer be an option.
Okay.
Now, there'll be some people with the view that you're not being customer-centric and omnichannel. It's not about that. It's about making sure that the value you do provide and the flexibility you do brings most value to what your customer needs. If you try and be all things to all people, you quite simply make yourself uncompetitive and die. Being
customer-centric doesn't mean that we should do business the wrong way.
Correct. So that's scaling up for us and accelerating the momentum we've started now that we have the base in. I think the next thing on top of that is really, how do you take the personalisation agenda forward?
Okay.
And use innovation again as a way for us to accelerate into new spaces that can potentially bring new value opportunities to us in a very fast, iterative way. And again, being very open culturally to that, fail fast, learn fast model. That's, again, in this part of the world, it's a tricky new thing to bring to an organisation. So we're doing that in a sensible way and trying to grow a critical mass and build that through. But we've had our failures this year.
I would love to ask you what they might be.
Yeah.
What could you share? What would you share?
So we tried a couple of experiments bringing some new tech to the voice channel.
Okay.
And we've also looked at some alternative risk models through our selling processes. And in days and weeks, we were able to fail. And through very, very quick, low cost, but take a lot of learnings out of that into the next set of problems we were trying to solve and the experiments that we were running. And that will continue to happen. And we've been very transparent. So we've shared that with the executive team, my boss, CEO, to show not about the fact that we fail, but the fact that we've learnt to avoid doing something that traditionally could have been a 12-month program, could have been a couple of $1 million that would have been thrown in the toilet because it wouldn't have been used or there was no value there.
If I'm a colleague that's listening to you, what would maybe one of those lessons be? What am I looking out for in terms of a red flag, right?
Yeah, I think it's being aware up front that we're playing in an uncertain, ambiguous area.
Okay.
So we will go through the rigor up front, but there will still be ways that we may miss the boat.
Okay.
I think starting that journey with us, and we're doing that again very small early, and being open and accepting of that is what I encourage anyone that joins our team in that space. Failure is not bad. Failure is making sure we don't go about that with what we would have done traditionally, and you've actually had a success, because your success is you've avoided spending a whole bucket of money on something that doesn't add value to the company.
That's it. Failure is not bad, but failure without learning is certainly bad.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, failing on the same thing the same way is obviously not a good thing, so the learnings need to be effective ones.
One of the definitions of insanity.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. All right. So speaking of insane, you're from Australia, right? I love to do that way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Where are you from? In one of my favorite countries. And
so Sydney, and largely spend most of my time growing up in an area called Maroubra.
Okay. And as far as Sydney is concerned, we of course saw that the rugby, the Australian rugby team had a draw with South Africa on Australian soil, which was of course a terrible thing, right?
Would you mind if I took the fifth on that one? This conversation could go in an entirely new direction if we keep on that path.
So, but as far as growing up in Australia, when you were a kid, what were you into? Were you playing rugby as a kid?
Yeah.
Of course you were, right?
Yep.
What's a good lesson learned from being on the rugby pitch? Would you call it the rugby pitch?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, I played rugby right up to my adulthood, so it's I learnt that whole harmony of team culture, backing each other up. It's a thing I try and bring in the corporate space, because there's nothing better than being out there in the battlefield. And the battlefield could be, serving customers. It could be in the back office, getting your work done.
Sure.
And knowing that at all times, in all circumstances, the person next to you's got your back. Come hell or high water type of thing. And
without question, no matter how much you actually like each other or not, right?
Exactly. And no matter how bad you do, no matter how catastrophic a mistake you made, your back's covered. That is a very unique thing in some sports, I think, and NFL in the US, I'm sure, is the same. You just can't buy that. You can't teach that. It's something you've just got to evolve. And I think if I could bring a little bit of that in the corporate space, the environment you work in just becomes an absolute joy, 9 to 5 every day of the week.
When you started to make your way into the workforce, where did you find yourself?
Yeah, great question. I had this discussion with one of my team members today. He was asking me about my life story. So I started in hospitality very, very early, and men's retail.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've had a bit of an interesting career, actually. I evolved there. I ended up playing rugby league professionally in Australia for a few years. Yeah.
Really? Which team?
Team's South Sydney.
All right.
South Sydney Rabbitohs back in the 90s. So
how'd you do?
We did okay.
Yeah.
I love the code. So it was just a pleasure being fortunate enough to play at a level with some of the guys that are brilliant at what they do. So, but the environment, the culture, and just it's very unique. It's very unique.
So when I bring up rugby to you, we are really speaking specifically. You might even know some of the guys that are on the field there.
No,
right?
I'm a bit older.
Oh, I see. It's been some time.
Yeah, it has.
All right.
It has.
So retail, okay, fine. You make your way out to what? Where did you kind of make your way into the executive suite, I guess? When was that?
Yeah, that wasn't really until I got into the financial services insurance space. So, I had local government. I had my own company in consulting and worked in the pharmaceutical and building and construction. So I was a bit all over the place for quite a number of years.
Yeah.
And then found my way into the financial services space in Sydney and evolved then overseas into Asian markets and worked my way through to where I am today. So indirectly, whilst a lot of my older part of my career is in the tech space and various roles in technology and different industries, I sort of evolved into the business space, but indirectly it always had a customer part of it.
Sure.
But now it's front and centre,
Yeah.
which is something I'm really enjoyed because it's sort of taken that part of my role to now being core.
Got it.
And it's something I'm very passionate about. So I think, if more companies could get that simple understanding that, without customers we don't exist, and then get that passion out there to the organisation. I mean, the potentials of growth and making sure that culture, I don't think you can copy.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the differentiators in business today.
Yeah. I wonder why you are passionate about this. I am understanding that you generally are a passionate person, because to do that to yourself on a rugby field is ridiculous. I've watched the sport. It's insane. So, sure, you're a passionate guy, but why passionate about this?
I think I just believe in the fundamentals of it all. I think, I'm always looking for an opportunity where you can add value, I'm sure as most employees do, to organisations. But I fundamentally believe if you get that customer game right, you can put yourself apart from many of your competitors. And again, I think technology you can copy, distribution channel you can copy, product you can copy. You can't copy the way you treat customers.
Yeah.
I don't think. That comes down to a person thing. And if you don't live by it, it won't resonate down through the organisation.
And I don't mean to beat a dead horse here by going back to rugby, but I feel like that's how each rugby team sees it. Like, we might not be more talented than you, but if we play harder than you, we will win.
Yeah. Yeah, it's rugby, like most codes of football.
Yeah.
That's a sport you can't play half-hearted. If you will get hurt.
Sure, right, yeah.
So, I guess maybe poor analogy, but bringing some of that into the corporate space, again, for me, is, if you treat the customer game half-heartedly, no one's going to buy into it.
Yeah.
In which case, that will resonate right through the organisation, and it will determine your results at the end of the day.
And you've mentioned now twice here, you're right on the edge right now, no matter who you are and where you are. If you do it wrong, you're going backwards. If you do it right, you're going forwards.
Yeah, and that's my sad plug to anyone. If you're not fully embedded, fully committed, and you want to go through this thing and persevere, because the agenda is not an end point, it's a journey, and the journey goes on forever. Don't go in.
Just don't.
No, do something else.
One just quick question here. You mentioned pharmaceutical, you mentioned retail, you mentioned insurance. I mean, you've been in a lot of different types of organizations. You've been in many different industries. What is a similarity or the similarity between all of those places that you've been, or is there that?
Yeah, I think all my roles have been very different, from small companies to multinationals. So I've had a bit of a mix. I think, again, I would say, whilst I probably wasn't consciously aware of it in the earlier parts of my career, if I sort of reflect in hindsight and look at what I did, I would like to go back and have the passion I have to now embedded. I don't think I would have changed a lot in what I did, but I think it would have changed the way I approached it and how I communicated with others.
And, of course, the output, right?
Exactly, exactly. So, as I said, I think indirectly, particularly over the last sort of several years, the customer has been there as an indirect part of the work that I do. Yeah. But, I now have got the opportunity to work with a great business and a great group of people to put it front and centre and just live and breathe it and just see the joy when you get success.
I love it. I've got 3 final questions for you. I'll tell you what they are. I'll ask you them in order. What has most surprised you at work along the way? What's most surprised you in life and on the soundtrack of your life, Troy Barnes? One track, one song, that's got to be on there. But first things first, what's most surprised you at work? This is in your career.
What's most surprised me at work? I think the ability to get people to get into new space. I think.
How do you mean?
My roles largely have been around change and transformation for a long time, whether it's tech or non-tech, and I think what I find that's culturally agnostic in some ways, there are always people who are looking for that opportunity to chomp at the bit, do something great, do something different. One of the things that I've done well in some areas and I haven't done well in some other areas is try to adapt that as culturally fitting as I could have in the markets I've been. So some have worked better than others, but I've always found pockets of those people, and then once you get hold of that and you've got that critical mass, the world's your oyster.
Yeah.
So that's been one of the things that surprised me through my journey, particularly outside of Australia. And there are those people who are willing to challenge the status quo. They just need some guidance and reinforcement. And back to our earlier sort of analogy on rugby. Yeah. They just need to know someone's got their back. Yeah. And it's amazing what people can do when you've got that and they've got that trust. Yeah. I've had both sides of the coin, some great things that have happened, some stuff that hasn't gone so well. Sure. But like we're doing now, you take the learnings and try and do it better next time, and grow through that, because every market's different. Sure. So that's the first one.
Yeah, that's kind of a big answer. And so when I say, or when I ask, what's most surprised you in life, what might you say to that?
What's most surprised me in life? I tell you, there's an old saying, behind a great man is a greater woman. So I've been very fortunate to be married for almost 20 years next month.
Oh, look at that. Yeah. Congratulations.
So, that's been the biggest part of success for me, having that kind of support behind you all the way relentlessly. Just makes all the difference when you're tackling on these new things.
So on behalf of all of us, thank you, Mrs. Barnes. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether she calls herself that or not, it doesn't matter. Yeah. All right, so on the soundtrack of your life, one track, one song that's got to be on there.
Great question. There's a lot that I could pick.
I do have a question for you, Troy. How can we sleep if our beds are burning?
Yes, Midnight Oil.
There you go.
Peter Garrett, he's got great dance moves, but I'm not sure he'd be my pick of that whole song. I'm going to be a bit old school, maybe a little bit sentimental here. I'll say Louis Armstrong.
Look at you.
Yeah, I think, again, dig beneath the sort of superficial level. Take note of the words. I mean, John Lennon sings a sort of similar but different tune with Imagine later on in life. It is a wonderful world. There's just so much to discover out there, personally and professionally. I mean, my 3 kids have been with me through the journey. Yeah. You hope that through that they've been chopping and changing with my career. Yeah. That they grow up much better because they're more culturally aware. They've been in different places. They've explored the world. There's just so much out there that you can do, and the world is an untapped resource to do so much at the moment, whilst we have a few road bumps, and I won't mention certain individuals in certain parts of the world, but
they know who they are.
They do. But it is, the world's a great place. Yeah. And it's great if you want to make it great.
I'll tell you, that song is beautiful. And if you're listening and you can't sing it to yourself right now, go ahead and put it on, because that's one of the best songs there is. So.
Yeah. Yeah, so that'd be my pick.
There you go. Troy Barnes, man. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And there you have Troy Barnes. You're not going to get insight and observation about what customers are really thinking and what problems they're really trying to solve unless you're out there with them. And the agenda is not an endpoint. It's a journey, and the journey goes on forever. Very much appreciate Troy and his time. Very much appreciate you and yours. Stay tuned.